changes, because some of this stuff is anathema to us, quite honestly, and it needs to be reviewed. It needs to be dragged into the 21st century, kicking and screaming, and we need to have a fully open and transparent council, both for our members of public and for councillors, so that they can fully get their meaning communicated across. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. There weren't any other speakers, Councillor Wilson, you did reserve your right to speak. Do you want to come back in?
Just briefly, Mr Mayor, because a number of the points I would have made have been made very eloquently by members, certainly on the Conservative side of the chamber. But one of the things that this new administration, under my leadership, is extremely keen to do is to allow debate to take place. We might not like what we have to hear, but we are elected to hear it nevertheless. Debate is the lifeblood of democracy, and if we ignore it, if we disallow it, then we are in danger of making bad decisions. And that's why I am extremely keen on the programme of reforms which I initiated at the annual council, and Councillor Walmsley is taking up with relish. For far too long, debate in this chamber has been lacking spontaneity. It has been scripted to death. And we knew the result before we even arrived in this chamber. And I think I may have actually done Councillor Watkins a number of favours in some of these reforms, because if he was sitting as Leader of the Opposition as I was, under the rules that I had to operate under, he wouldn't get anywhere near half of the points across as he is doing at the moment and will do in the future. And I did that as a member leading just 3 councillors. You are experiencing to a degree tonight what I had for 2 years, with just 3 of you being here, but at least you have another 4 who can come once COVID's gone. I actually had just 3, and it is exceptionally frustrating. But those minority voices do have a place in debate and society, and they must be heard. But they must be heard and challenged. That is what debate is about. And when we challenge and have robust argument and scrutiny of a policy or proposal, then I think we are all the better for it. So I welcome the changes coming forward from audit and standards, and I too hope that more come forward to make this chamber a great debating chamber for the residents of Nuneaton and Bedworth, and a chamber that the residents of Nuneaton and Bedworth can be proud of, because I'm afraid, Mr Mayor, residents were not proud of this chamber under the previous regime, and we looked like a private eye council. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Walmsley, back to you to respond before we go to the vote.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. As I think you've heard from this side, gone are the days of the rotten borough. Open the windows and the sunlight of disinfectant is coming into our constitution. To respond to a couple of points about IP, independent persons, and more of them, I'll make a commitment. If anyone wants to apply, any member of the public wants to apply to be an independent person, I will happily, as Chair of Audit and Studies, convene a subcommittee to hear those applications. And if there are people that come forward that we can fill into those roles, it's very simple. We can have an amendment to the Constitution to increase those numbers. It comes to the next council and it can take effect relatively quickly. So I will make that commitment tonight. If any member of the public wants to apply to be an independent person to any of our committees, to any of our panels, I am more than happy to convene the relevant meetings to hear those applications, to review those applications, to bring them forwards. But what I want to see longer term is actually the way in which we engage residents, not necessarily those who are going to come and sit for a meeting a whole evening, but those who want to put their thoughts and submissions in. Those who maybe can't come to the town hall. And how can we innovate as a local authority to bring those voices in to the local authority? Because we are only better by the more debate, by the more points and the plurality of view. That is how we improve. That is how decision-making and policy improves. So rest assured, they will be looked at. I mean, it would be wonderful if we could have people looking at what technological advances are available to us now, whether people can submit a selfie video for 30 seconds commenting on an item on the agenda. We can show that rather than them having to come into the town hall. There are things like that we want to look at, that I want to look at and investigate, that members of the Audit and Standards Committee have put forward, and which people, the relevant working party, we'll assess, we'll look at, and we will do our absolute utmost to make this constitution even better. So that covers more independent persons, and it also covers the points on public consultation. In respect of named individuals, well, as Councillor Golby said, personally I think we'd be here all night if we did that. The amount of times that, are we going to notify the MPs every time the then Labour leader stood up and tried to rubbish them by name? Are they going to be invited in because they might be referenced in reply by an answer by the then cabinet member? No, it cannot be done. We must look to move forward to make sure we get the questions, we get the answers, and that is most important. And frankly, we now have a mayor who is open. We've seen questions from members of the public who can't be here, though could have been accommodated in the public gallery, including those that I believe are even working miles and miles away that couldn't come just back home for a meeting. That would never have happened under the dictatorship and the tyranny of the then mayor. That would never have happened. It's an alien concept. But what we have, and what we have for good, is someone that uses that authority and discretion that is given to them in the Constitution, and they use that for the good. In relation to e-petitions, Councillor Evans must have read my mind, as I submitted a number of items literally today that are for that to potentially go onto the agenda of the working party, one of which is the introduction of an e-petition system. Far overdue, far too late, but it is a priority of this Conservative administration. These items won't be solved overnight. We've had decades of a constitution. Our constitution in Nuneaton and Bedworth, for anybody interested, and if the video is showing, our constitution is that thick. It is over 400 pages long. By comparison, Warwickshire County Council is just over 200. Almost half, as is the Warwick District Council, and I believe Rugby District Councils is even below the 200 mark. Now, there may be reasons for this, we don't know. But how is a 400-page document that, let's be honest, nobody can know, that, let's be honest, was interpreted in questionable ways over the years, questionable ways, how can that be good for a democracy? Members of the public can't understand that. And I'll hazard a guess that a number of councillors probably don't have their own copy of the Constitution as I do, probably couldn't tell you what Article 5 talks about, or Article 6, or Schedule 7. And I think that is really important as well. So these are all things that are going to be looked at, how we can open our democracy, make it better, easier to understand for the public, but also for us, so that we can function better. So assured, these are the start of greater things to come, and we will be moving to those as rapid pace as physically possible. So, Mr. Mayor, I do so move those on the paper.
Thank you, Councillor Walmsley. So there's no more speakers. We're going to move to the vote. Yes, Councillor, that's why we're doing 14A now. I know we've spent quite a bit of time on 14A, but we are doing them one at a time. So if we could move to the vote and show all those in favour, 14A. And again, that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Right, we move on to the much simpler 14B, arrangements for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Again, Councillor Walmsley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bob again. This will take, I hope will not be as long. These are not controversial. So, Mr. Mayor, move the recommendations as set on the agenda with the addition that Councillor Lubbs-Ketchevich be appointed to the working group in addition to those named on our paper. That was missed off for some reason. So that is to include those named on the agenda plus Councillor Lubbs-Ketchevich. Mr. Mayor, I think it is highly important that we have together and we get together arrangements for Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee, and that we start to work on that as quickly as possible. And I hope that the engagements, that the programme events that hopefully this committee will come up with, and I'm sure it absolutely will be under those members that serve it, those loyal members loyal to Her Majesty and the Crown, will certainly be welcome. And I think, Mr. Mayor, they'll give us all something to look forward to after a period of doom, gloom, desperation and despair under COVID and those restrictions, which thankfully legally will all be gone in just a few days' time. Mr. Mayor, I so move, and I look forward enthusiastically to the way in which our borough, our proud borough, and the symbol of Her Majesty in front of you, of our mace, and we can look forward to those celebrations coming forward in a truly wonderful way, that inclusive for all of our borough. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councillor. So this is 14B. A seconder, please. Councillor Kenner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I second that proposal and I reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Any member? So, Councillor Condigal.
Thank you, Chair. It is really important that we get over this COVID and have a celebration of Her Majesty's marvellous life ruling this country. It's interesting that the people talking about this aren't wearing masks, as it's been brought up earlier. The opposition group are wearing masks and the officers are wearing masks. I do think we should be looking after each other.
Councillor, if I may interrupt, we're socially distanced. But if you can speak to the item, thank you.
I can speak to the item. And I think it's important that the Jubilee is inclusive and it's not captured by a small group of people. So I'd really like there to be actually members of all political parties invited to take part in this process in planning it, and it not just be a select few. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is something which is actually close to my heart. I'm a fervent monarchist. I make absolutely no apologies for being so. Her Majesty has served us according to her broadcast as a teenager throughout her life, whether it be long or short. Thankfully, it has been long, and long may that continue. The answer to Councillor Condicor's point is quite simple. This is being done on a proportionality basis. If you want more representation on committees, then you get more councillors elected under your banner. That is the way that our democracy works, and that is the way it will continue. But, Mr. Mayor, in supporting this, which is something I asked Councillor Walmsley as a personal request from me to consider this item, because it is something I passionately believe in. Whilst I am pretty sure that Brent will tell me I cannot afford to have Brian May playing God Save the Queen on his guitar from the roof of the town hall, if not on grounds of cost, but probably on grounds of health and safety, as I'm fully aware that he has been briefing me on health and safety matters and COVID over the past few weeks, we can still do things within our control that will actually celebrate the life of Her Majesty and her reign. And I am aware there has already been some tentative interest from other organisations and parties about what can be done for the Platinum Jubilee, whether that be some works within the town centres and the markets, whether that be music festivals, which should be relatively cheap to put on, and is something that we will be investigating through the budget setting process. I don't believe it should cost thousands, Mr. Mayor. I believe it costs time and will to push forward. And I can assure residents that I certainly have the will to push forward, and the only thing we need is to have Her Majesty still there, become the June bank holiday next year, and I pray with every fibre of my being that she is, because she has been a fantastic representation of the United Kingdom and a symbol of continuity in an age of change which has come upon us through various guises, and long may she continue to reign, Mr. Mayor. Let's get on with the Platinum Jubilee and let's have a celebration.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Golby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's ironic that the Green Party member wants to be on the committee celebrating the Queen when the Greens aren't exactly the monarchists that we would all expect. I think they wanted to kick her out and give her a council house, didn't they? I think that was something that they said. I'm sorry, I referred to the Greens, not you. Can I just continue and then you can say what you want to say? So I would actually like to see a picture of the Queen or the reigning monarch in this chamber when we are in session. I would also like to see a Union flag in this chamber when we are in session. I think that might be a step too far for some, however, it's my wish. So I might propose that at another meeting. I think we're doing the right thing with this. We are getting the ball rolling fairly early on, because we do have to take a long time to prepare these things properly, and we need to make sure it is done properly, and God willing the Queen will be there to celebrate her Jubilee. And I'm quite pleased with the way the proportionality has worked out, because we are keeping it by the rule book. So there's no ambiguity about that for anybody. We aren't picking or choosing anybody. We are actually doing it by the proportionality rules that we are given in this council. And as Councillor Wilson said, if people need more people or want more people on committees, they need to get more of their party members elected.
Thank you, Councillor. Just to make the point, the Union flag is on order. I sorted that out, sir. Next speaker is Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm delighted to hear that the Union flag is on order. I've been banging on about it for quite some time. I agree with Councillor Golby that we do need to have a portrait of Her Majesty in this chamber. So I can confirm that I will commission my officers at the museum tomorrow to see if we do have a portrait already in the collection, and if so, I will ask my officers to move that from the museum into this chamber.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so no one else indicated. On that basis, Councillor Kenner, you did reserve your right to speak. Do you want to come back in?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am absolutely delighted to be supporting and seconding these proposals tonight. Her Majesty the Queen and the institution of the monarchy are the great unifiers of all of us. We are all equal under her. And after a difficult year, a difficult 18 months, I cannot think of a better way to bring our communities and our people, our friends and families back together than by celebrating the individual and the institution that makes us all equal, and to celebrate the long life, the long reign and the 70 years of stability that Her Majesty the Queen has brought our nation and our communities. Mr. Mayor, I'm delighted to second this proposal. God save the Queen.
Thank you, Councillor. So, Councillor Walmsley, do you want to come back in before the vote?
Yes, just very quickly, I'd like to thank Councillor Golby's comments about the request of a portrait of Her Majesty, and welcome Councillor Evans's commitment that he's given to us this evening. This was an item and a request raised at Audit and Standards when this particular item was being discussed at the committee, and it received very widespread, if not universal, support from the members that were present that evening. So I'm very glad to see that that's been done. Mr. Mayor, I think this the committee speaks for itself. It is, and I therefore do reiterate, sir, that I move as per the agenda, with the additional member selected by council as being Councillor Lubbs Kechevich, and I do so move, sir.
Thank you very much, Councillor Walmsley. So we will move to the vote. All those in favour, please raise your hand. So, yep, that's everyone but one. Against? Abstentions? Just one. Thank you very much. So we're going to move on to 14C, update to the office member protocol. Again, this is audit and standard. So again, if I can ask Councillor Walmsley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I rise to move another recommendation I set out on the agenda papers to amend and update the officer member protocol. So 2.1 was approved by council in April, and the constitution will be amending 2.1 being approved by Council in April, and the amendment that 2.2 be amended accordingly. Effectively, what we also have here, and I need to clarify that actually I believe there's an error in the paperwork here. This single member decision was taken on the 18th of June and not the 28th as we have in our papers. It doesn't, in my opinion, make any difference, but I think it's very important that we just put that on record, that error in the papers there, sir. I don't think there's a great deal to be said about this one, and therefore I will so move.
Thank you, Councillor. Brent, can we confirm that will be, thank you, corrected? Thank you. Seconder, please.
I will second that, Mr Mayor, and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Fairly straightforward, but any member? Councillor Wilson, did you want to come back in? Nope. Then Councillor Walmsley, did you want to come back in, or shall I move to the vote? Then on... should we... Councillor Shepherd is absent, so we will proceed anyway, we did say. So, all those in favour? So that's unanimous of everyone here. Thank you. Right, we're now moving on to 14D, Employment Committee, Audit and Standards Committee report. It's page 96 in the report, and again, I'm calling on Councillor Walmsley.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, in moving the Employment Committee, can I just note that Audit and Standards actually approved a version of this which is not as printed in the order paper this evening. There actually should be, and was agreed by Audit and Standards, and is in the minutes which are due to be signed next week. There is a VIE, which is Commission an Annual Performance Review of the Head of Paid Service. So that would be submitted, would be included in there at VIE. That was approved by Audit and Standards. It was amended and added at the Audit and Standards meeting, but it has not been copied across this paperwork this evening, sir. So if I can just update that accordingly there, please, just to draw that attention to members. At the same time, there is a requirement for moving of council of those members to be appointed to the new Employment Committee, and therefore, Mr Mayor, may I move Councillor Wilson, Councillor Croft, Councillor Walmsley and Councillor Brown be the Conservative nominations, and accept the nomination from the Leader of the Labour Party. I'm very happy with your permission, Mr Mayor. If he wants to give that now, I'm happy to include that now, or he can come to it in his speech. It's entirely up to him. No problem. So that is the amendment there. Mr Mayor, I think it's very important that we look to establish this employment committee. As we've discussed in the past, there are employment practices in this borough that relate to legislation that's out of date, that doesn't exist anymore. There are reviews of elements that have not happened since the early noughties or the early 2000s. That really need to be updated and looked at before now, and at some point, and I'm surprised they haven't already, caused us trouble because they're just not compliant. So I think that's going to be a real important task of this committee. The reason that Audit and Standards inserted VIE, which is the verbal amendment I've made at the start of this, is that I don't believe certainly the current 2MD structure, and certainly I believe Alan Franks before his departure, my understanding is they've never had performance reviews. Now, I think it absolutely vital that we expect that of all other offices in our authority, and I think it's just scandalous that it hasn't happened at the very top as well to date. So I think it's important, and the reason why that amendment is to commission an annual performance review is that, given that being a chief executive level, it'd be very important that that committee is able to commission a review and to get potentially outside people in to look at benchmarking, to look at other standards outside, to make sure that actually, and I'm not making any comment in respect of any current or former MDs, CEOs, chief executives, whatever they've been called, but for going forward, for whomever may be in the position in future, to make sure that we as an authority are getting deliverance of value for money, and to make sure that we as an authority have got competent people at the top. As I say, I make no comments at all about any current occupants or previous of the position. But I think it's an important principle. It's what we expect of every other member of staff in this authority, and I think it should absolutely be for those at the top as well. Mr. Mayor, I think this committee is very important. It's very important to be established, and we look to take those functions and we look to actually say we are a member-led organisation, we are a member-led authority, as we should be, and I think it's very important that as members we are making sure that those at the top, as is required for under the Local Government Act, those individuals are being held to account properly, and any questions that arise from that be dealt with properly, but also actually looking at the other spectrum and saying that we as member-led authority, we should be making sure that all of our officers, from the very bottom to the very top, are done and are looked after in an appropriate manner, that their employment conditions, that the terms of their conditions, and also the legislation and policies we have in place are up to date and are compliant. Because the last thing we as an authority want to do is take a decision. Let's be frank, we all know how difficult it can be in local government to get rid of somebody. So heavens forbid that we have to take that decision as an authority, and then suddenly that is overturned because our employment practices are not right, they're not up to date, and they're not compliant. And I don't want anything that ties the back of, be that officials, because they obviously are in charge of appointment, disciplinary procedures, etc., of those in the vast majority, except for the very top tiers of councillors. And I don't want anything to tie their backs, hand behind their backs, if they do have to make some tough decisions. So I absolutely wholeheartedly support this. This will bring about a wealth of reforms which will be a huge benefit to the employees of our authority, as well as making sure that we fulfil functions that we would expect across the bottom all the way up to the top. Sir, I move.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so I just want to make sure we're all clear what audit and standards voted on and accepted. The final bit, VIE, has been missed off the paperwork, but you verbally articulated that. That will, Brent, be added into the paperwork. Great. So on that understanding, is there a second, Councillor Evans, you want to second that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I do. I wish to second the proposal tabled by the Chairman of the Audit and Standards Committee. I'll give my statement now, with your permission. Actually, and as opposed for the newer members in this chamber, actually, we as councillors do have some say in the employment of our staff. I think I'm one of the few members in this chamber, and I'm happy to stand corrected if I'm wrong here, but I believe, one of the few members who's actually had to sit on two separate appeals committee hearings over the last 12 months, which has determined the employment prospects of two members of staff. I won't go into the specific details of that because it would be in breach of the Local Government Act. But having been a member of the appeals committee, I know just how outdated some of our human resources policies actually are. And having sat on one of these committees, I know that one of those policies goes back all the way to 2002. I was 4 at the time. And of course, look, legislation has evolved since then. So although I know that legislation supersedes council policy, I do feel that a lot of these policies need to be updated, and I know that's one of the roles that this new committee will take. So I'm absolutely in support of the proposals, and I hope that it gets support across the chamber.
Thank you, Councillor. Any member? Councillor Condical.
Chair, this will be a very important committee and very powerful. Obviously, it says the constitution will be amended appropriately, but it would be useful if Councillor Walmsley could explain to which committee scrutinises this panel then, because you've now set up an employment panel. Obviously, a lot of its work will be on pink paper, And so it would be useful to know how it works itself in the democratic process, particularly in light of some comments ages ago, well, not ages ago, a couple of months ago, about draining swamp and various other things about management team. I do think we do need to make sure this has its own checks and balances, and whether the chair of this panel and its minutes go to full council or audit and standards, because it's a very small committee as well. Obviously, the Greens and the Independents currently wouldn't sit on it, where we would sit on audit and standards, etc. So if Councillor Walmsley could explain how it fits in and how itself is monitored, that would be most useful, Chair. And I'll, after hearing that, decide how I'll vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wasn't actually going to speak on this item because I've spoken on enough of them already. But as someone who is potentially going to be on this committee, and I would assume possibly even chairing it, because that's a way of avoiding paying SRAs. Additionally, since there will already be people on there who have an SRA, you can't have two, so that will save that. My belief would be that as this is a committee of council, it will be open to any councillor to receive copies of agendas, to come and make representation, and to speak on items, particularly if we are dealing with issues of policy. I would welcome that. I believe it is important that we have a broad representation coming forward to that. So if Councillor Condacor has a particular beef about a policy which is coming forward, it may or may not be in private session. I don't particularly see why a policy should be in private session. I could understand why an individual's employment would be in private session. But if we're talking about a policy nevertheless, then that would be open and he would be able to speak in public or whether it is in private. Because as a councillor, we all have the right to attend any item which is even in pink. That is our right and privilege as an elected member. So regardless of whether it was in private session or not, then Councillor Condacor or indeed any other member could attend that. I do believe it is important that we have the checks and balances for the new, whoever the chief executive will be, and that's coming to, or senior officers will be, and that will be an item for discussion later on. And it's about the position rather than the person. It is about ensuring that whoever holds the chief officer role in this organisation has their performance benchmarked as any other organisation would. And I think that is a demonstration of strong and stable leadership. I think that's a phrase we haven't heard for a while. But other organisations do it. When I was when I was on a board of governors at a school, we quite often, as with the head teacher, we would get someone in to give us that experience, and then have a couple of governors. So I would assume in this instance something like the leader and the leader of the opposition would also be involved in doing that, because it has to be a fair process. So because there is also a duty to assist the opposition in that regard. So I think it is moving forward. And whilst I accept, as Councillor Evans alluded to, that legislation trumps everything, it would provide greater clarity to our employees if we do have policies that are there, that they are updated and refreshed. And I think having an employment committee that does it is probably a far better way than the alternative method which was put forward under the previous administration, which was dumping it on one of the overview and scrutiny panels. I think the overview and scrutiny panels have a difficult enough job to do if they are doing the job correctly in the first place, and going line by line through policies of employment which, to be fair, can be quite dull and tedious at times. Nevertheless, that is a job that needs doing, and having this panel to do it, I think, is worthwhile to keep on top of that. And I believe from my conversations with officers, they would be the first to recognise that there are policies which we would like to refresh, we haven't had the opportunity to refresh, and perhaps a bit of a spring clean is in order with a new administration. That's my interpretation, not officers. But I believe that that is a worthwhile exercise to undertake. So it will also potentially look at taking on roles of the remuneration panel, because we are looking at the wider senior officer contingent from time to time when resignations or retirements come forward, etc. So having a proper standing committee rather than an ad hoc committee which gets called every so often, I think is actually beneficial too, because there is some work which we will be discussing later which is necessary in that as well. So I think this is a good way forward, and I think we need to, as with a lot of things, and we have demonstrated under this new administration, let's just get on with the job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. I didn't see anyone else indicate, so I will go back to Councillor Walmsley.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, to assure everybody, this is a committee of council, so it would function in the same way and the same rules as, for example, the Borough Plan Review Committee, chaired ably by Councillor Smith. It would function the same way as rules and regulations as per our OSPs. It would set as a full committee of this council. And as Councillor Wilson has correctly said, it would be for any member to attend that, even if the item were on pink. That's a long-established tradition of this authority. Now, what that means is, and actually I agree with Councillor Wilson, most of these items will not be on pink paper. Looking at our employment handbook, for example, and staff working practices and the various HR policies we have, those are public and accountable. These are open for anybody and everybody to see in the public domain anyway. A lot of them form part of the Constitution. So they are already in the public domain. So there is no reason why the debates on these policies, including that of 2002, when Councillor Evans was just a couple of years old, knee-high to a grasshopper, there is no reason why those cannot be reviewed and done in openness, absolutely. There will be times when the items will be on pink paper, but I will remind everybody in this chamber that because it's on pink paper does not automatically mean it will be heard in private. It is for the committee to assess and decide and take a vote on whether it should be on private or should not be in private, to take into account the elements of public interest and weigh those up against other sections of legislation and requirements. That is for the committee to take a decision on an ad hoc, piece-by-piece basis. Well, no disrespect to officers, but because they put it on pink does not mean it has to be held in private. And I think for too long we've been a little bit afraid in this authority to perhaps not to stand up for actually what we believe in and to stand up for the overwhelming public interest, including especially when everybody named in an item actually asks for it to be public and then it's not public and causes all sorts of problems later on. So I think that absolutely is key, and when videos aren't uploaded because of it, etc. So I think it's absolutely key just to remember that point. Now, because this is a committee of council, I should have been clear at the start, and I do apologise not being so. When moving the members, actually we as council need to appoint the individual named as chair of the committee. So apologies for not having done that at the start. The proposal is for the committee to be chaired by Councillor Croft, for members to be Councillor Wilson, Councillor Walmsley, Councillor Brown, and if Councillor Watkins wants to make a nomination, if I could have his name, because as council we have to approve everybody that goes onto that committee. That's how it's always done. I'm happy to be interjected on as leader of the opposition if he wants to, with your indulgence, Mr Mayor, just so we get this on record and we do it completely above rules as required.
By all means, if you're prepared for that.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm more than happy to go on that. And just to let you know, Mr Mayor, that Councillor Rudkins had to go, family emergency.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. Sorry, I didn't quite hear what you'd said earlier, that you were going on it, so apologies if that's what you said before. Apologies. So yes, so that will be then Councillor Croft to chair, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Walmsley, Councillor Brown and Councillor Watkins as leader of the opposition to go on that. So I apologise for getting that slightly wrong in the introduction, but to be official and above board, council appoints the chair and it appoints the members. So that is, and I will detain no further, and I hope everything goes okay for Councillor Rudkin, having been in similar situations in the past. So thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. So we're all clear on the additional bit that was missed off the paperwork, and we're all clear on the names now that will sit on there. And so I am going to move to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? That's one. And any abstentions? That's one more. Understood. Councillor Wilson?
Mr Mayor, just looking at the time and considering what we have left on the agenda, could I just move a suspension of standing orders to enable all business to be concluded tonight? Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Evans, you're going to second that?
Yes, I'm happy to second that.
If we can, procedural motion, so there's no debate, can we move to the vote? Suspend standing orders until conclusion of business? That appears to be unanimous. Thank you. Right, so we're going to move on to 14E, not in the original publication, but it is an addendum. Very straightforward. We've talked already about the independent persons and the process that was gone through to try and find some additional ones. That was unsuccessful. So, no. We're not doing a... No, we are. Ah, OK. Councillor Walmsley, over to you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is for independent persons, which is not the same as the as what we spoke of earlier, which is independent members. So apologies, sorry, Mr.
Right.
Mayor,
So to make it clear, this isn't about co-opted members. These are the IPs, the independent persons. Thank you.
Yes, Mr Mayor. The previous was co-opted members. Those are members that would sit as on the panels that we have. They wouldn't have a right to vote, but they have a right to all the papers, information, and the chance to speak. This item is about independent persons, and with your indulgence, Mr Mayor, just for the record and for the public, I would just put on record what an independent person is. Independent persons are required under Section 28 of the Local Government Act 2011, and they may be appointed for a 4-year term. They may not serve more than 2 terms. So effectively, they could, in theory, sit for up to 8 years. What happens for independent persons is that where there is an allegation that a member of this authority has breached the codes of conduct, what will first happen is Section 28 requires then the Council of the Local Government Act Localism Act 2011, requires the Council to appoint 1 independent person and to seek their views about whether or not the alleged breach by a councillor of the code should or should not then be investigated further. So what will happen is supposedly all the evidence, though in experience most of it is missed off, Mr Mayor, and it is cut to suit those seeking the independent persons, which is something I think the Audit and Standards Committee is asked to look at in future. But supposedly they will be given all of the evidence in an unabridged way. The independent person will look at that and will say there may or they may not have been a potential breach of the rules, and they will then say, I believe that there should or there should not be an investigation into this allegation further. Effectively, they are a triage system, Mr Mayor. The Council is required to have a list of those, and the independent persons, they can be appointed for a 4-year term and cannot be appointed for more than 2 terms. The situation we are in at the moment is that we have a number of independent persons who are now timed out, and so they will not be reappointed. What we did and what we have done and recommend is also that Warwickshire County Council on behalf of a number of all the Warwickshire lower tier authorities and in conjunction with Solihull Metropolitan Borough Council is currently running a recruitment exercise for independent persons. They are doing that recruitment, if you like, looking at their CVs and checking the standards of them and whether they meet the criteria or not to be an independent person. Following that, they will be presenting to us as an authority later on some additional names that we may wish to consider. I believe those will come to Audit and Standards, and then they will come, as we are tonight, as a recommendation to Council. So that will probably end up being September Council, as I understand, where we will be looking at those. But in the interim, we are still required to have some, and we have 3 members that are currently coming, or have come this month to the end of their 4-year term, and who are not qualified out by the 2-term rule. And so what I seek to do in this, Mr Mayor, is to reappoint Gareth Murphy, Maureen O'Sullivan and Mumtaz Ghulam to be reappointed as independent persons for a second term of 4 years until July 2025. and that we will in due course hopefully have more names from Warwickshire County Council whom we can look to approve or not approve or whatever we might wish to do down the line to increase and expand our complement of independent persons so that we can have a functioning system. So that is, Mr Mayor, in essence, it's the reappointment of those 3 named individuals with the promise of additional ones to come in due course, sir. So I do so move, as on the addendum.
Thank you very much, Councillor. So just to be clear, they're going through the recruitment exercise now, but there are 3 people that are eligible to be reappointed, only 3 left, so that we've got some. That's what we're moving tonight. And is there a seconder for that? Oh, Councillor Wilson, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will second that and reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Any member? Councillor Evans?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to support those 3 nominations, but I do know that actually we need to have more independent persons for the authority. If I could just say, I do very much support the fact that it is on appointment of full council, and I think if these new people come forward, I think what we need to have alongside the report is perhaps not a CV, but a short summary of what this individual's experience is in local government or in the private sector, just so that we know that they are qualified to fulfil that role.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other member? No? Right. I think in that case then, Councillor Walmsley, unless you want to... Wilson? No? Anyone? Right. Councillor Walmsley.
Thank you very much. Just briefly to come back on what Councillor Evans says, I'm very happy to have that heard. I think one of the lead officers for Audit Standards is here, and if I can ask her to refer that back to that and to make that request when those do come from WCC back to ANS and before coming to full council, if those could please be included for members of ANS and then obviously subsequently to council. So I think Councillor Wilson makes a very good point and I'm very happy to take that on board. So Mr Mayor, I move as in the paper, and just to reiterate those names, they are Gareth Murphy, Maureen O'Sullivan and Mumtaz Ghulam to be reappointed as independent persons on this authority for a second term of 4 years until July 2025, and I do so move.
Right. If I can have a show of hands then, all those in favour? That again is unanimous. Thank you for that. We will move on now to item 15, notice of motions. Councillor Wilson, will you move the recommendation set out in the agenda papers?
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I'm delighted to move this motion tonight, which shows that under this new Conservative administration, we are listening to the residents of Nuneaton, Bedworth and Bulkington. The Borough Plan has a checkered history and would take far too long to recount here tonight. Since taking control in May, we have already implemented one of our key manifesto commitments to review the Borough Plan. However, reviewing the Borough Plan, whilst we still have the same method for distributing the overspill, 4,000 houses from Coventry, will not address the fundamental unfairness that our borough is suffering from in comparison to other districts and boroughs in Warwickshire, that is the Memoranda of Understanding. As the Borough Plan Inspector said in his report, the 4,000 houses from Coventry, quote, represents a very significant 40% uplift on the borough's own objectively assessed need, unquote. The reality is that under the Labour leadership of this council, we were late to the table in negotiating the housing numbers that had to be redistributed. The rest of Warwickshire essentially carved up the numbers they were prepared to take, and we ended up with the remainder. Labour were asleep at the wheel, and it is the people of our borough who suffered. In May, the Office for Statistics Regulation dropped a huge bombshell that demands this council to act. The population growth figures for Coventry, which underpins the overspill requirements that we were forced to take, have been found to be wildly inflated. Even the Borough Plan Inspector recognised that Coventry's growth forecasts were high. He said at paragraph 90 of his report, quote, the forecast population growth in Coventry over the period 2011 to 31 is high at 32%, comparing with Birmingham at 16% and Nuneaton and Bedworth at 8%, unquote. This makes the review that we are undertaking critical to restoring fairness in our planning system. Withdrawing from the memorandum signed by Labour sends a clear signal of intent to our neighbours that they need to engage with us on a level playing field. We are willing to talk to our neighbours, but any future agreement between our councils must be on a fair and equitable basis. The memorandum worked on the basis that because we are closest to Coventry, we must take a greater proportion of the overspill in Nuneaton and Bedworth, 33% of their unmet need, despite the fact that we are the smallest district in the whole of Warwickshire. Again, that is fundamentally unfair. And since we have started our review, Labour held Coventry, who, let us not forget, the previous Labour leader of this council called to beg them to merge Nuneaton and Bedworth into Coventry, have said that our review is, quote, premature. Quite frankly, Mr Mayor, I find that statement to be an insult to the people of Nuneaton and Bedworth, given that we had to remove our land from Greenbelt to accommodate their housing based off flawed figures. This is Coventry Labour trying to deflect from the fact they got their housing figures fundamentally wrong, and our review highlights their own failure. Quite frankly, the residents of Coventry deserve better, and so do the residents of Nuneaton and Bedworth. It is time that Coventry Labour stepped up to the plate and began their own review, not just because we are, but because their own people are demanding it too. In fact, the review of our own borough plan is overdue and necessary. Don't just take my word for it. Again, the planning inspector said at paragraph 33, quote, bearing in mind the 2019 NPPF, the latest methodology to establish local housing need, and the requirement to ensure a deliverable supply of housing land, these factors come together to justify the Council committing to a comprehensive review of the plan before 31st of March 2023. This is a shorter period than the legislated 5 years, but I consider it necessary for soundness, so that a review can be aligned quickly to updated assessments of needs across the wider housing market area, unquote. Therefore, we are not premature, as Coventry Labour believe. They are, in fact, woefully late. But to do our review, we need to do it based on fairness for the people of Nuneaton and Bedworth. This motion ends our commitment to using the current MOU, and we will not sign up to any agreement that is not fair to Nuneaton and Bedworth. We may be the David to Coventry's Goliath, but under this new Conservative administration, we will continue to fight for the best interests of residents. We will not cave in like Labour. If we vote for this motion, it will send a clear signal of intent to all of our neighbours. This is a new administration. We want to talk and agree where possible, but not at any cost. Negotiate with us fairly, with data that is accurate and a distribution that recognises we are the geographically smallest but most densely populated district in Warwickshire, and we will engage. But if these conditions are not met, we will not sign any agreement. Because this new administration actually stands up for our borough. We said at the local election, Mr Mayor, that we will withdraw from the MOU, and I am pleased to stand here tonight and say, promise made, promise kept. I so move the motion, Mr Mayor.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Golby, you wish to second that?
I'll second and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you, Councillor. Any member? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This new Conservative administration was elected by an overwhelming majority in the recent May elections with a manifesto that promised the residents of this borough that we would correct many of the injustices foisted on the communities by Labour across this borough, stimulate the economic outlook in our town centres that have been so long left to decay by the previous administration, and bring about a new era of positive, forward-thinking local government with the vision, ambition and aspiration to better serve the residents of Nuneaton, Bedworth and Bulkington. Central to this manifesto was a promise to kickstart an immediate review of Labour's legacy of what is, by their own admission, a third-rate borough plan that's already blighted the lives of many residents and is set to swallow swathes of precious greenbelt from our already densely populated borough. Mr Mayor, the failed Labour administration had 2 years to get this review underway, and in their usual fashion they dragged their feet. This new Conservative administration in just 8 weeks has kick-started that review and is already halfway through the statutory Section 18 issues and options public consultation, with events happening across the borough. We have an ambitious plan to complete the review process that will see a revised local plan adopted in early 2023. But we're not stopping there. We're also promised to address the divisive issue of Coventry's overspill of 4,000 houses that in the last throes of the plan's development swallowed up much loved green belt in Bulkington, Hawkesbury, Whitestone, the woodlands in Bedworth and much more in the wider communities. So this motion today draws another line in the sand and is another promise kept by this new Conservative administration. Withdrawing from the current Memorandum of Understanding will in effect bring all our local authority partners in the wider housing area back to the table to renegotiate housing numbers under the duty to cooperate. Mr Mayor, you may have seen an article in local press just yesterday that quoted a Coventry Cabinet member as being disappointed at our decision to withdraw from the MOU, stating that our action was premature. We wholeheartedly disagree with that comment, and whilst Coventry have held back on reviewing their plan and are working with outdated, overinflated and much criticised 2014 ONS population forecast, we're getting on with our own review as a matter of urgency on a timescale that's fitting for Nuneaton, Bedworth and Bulkington, and is in line with the inspector's comments at the Borough Plan hearings, who recommended we review the local plan by 2023. To meet our ambitious time frame for this review, we've committed to and already halfway through the initial issues and options consultation phase. In the background to this, along with our neighbouring authorities, a new HEDNA, Housing and Economic Development Needs Assessment, has been commissioned that will look afresh at housing numbers and employment needs across the sub-region. And when this is available, we'll be ready to look again at housing numbers, talk to our neighbours and meet our commitments under the duty to cooperate. But Mr Mayor, we're not stopping there. The Secretary of State for Housing and Communities has the power to grant a moratorium on large-scale development, and we're asking the Minister to use those powers to halt new development in Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough whilst Coventry City Council's housing need is properly assessed at governmental level, and more appropriate arrangements are put in place to accommodate that need within Coventry's boundaries. Mr Mayor, this motion is not only another manifesto promise delivered, it is a bold move to correct one of Labour's worst legacies foisted on the good residents of Nuneaton, Bedworth and Bulkington, and I will be supporting it enthusiastically, and I'm looking forward to getting on with the job. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Next I've got Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And before I set out my views on this, I want to make it absolutely crystal clear. I'm not a NIMBY, and I don't believe the Conservative group are NIMBYs either. We accept there is a national housing shortage in this country, but I believe that housing needs to be built correctly in the right places and with the right infrastructure in place. And that is why I took the decision on a personal level to vote against the Borough Plan when it was presented back in 2019 because of the inclusion of the Bedworth woodlands on the grounds that it's an absolutely crazy policy to have, and I still question today why it was included. But I sat as both a local resident and as a councillor in the planning inspectorate hearings on the Borough Plan, and I vividly remember the inspector stating that upon us as a council approving the local plan, we have to go for an immediate review. And I, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Golby, Councillor Smith, we sat there in 2019 immediately after when we said we need to get the ball rolling with this immediate review, and I'm afraid to say that the Labour group just sat on their hands and did nothing. And what I need to stress is to local residents who have, I think, have a legitimate concern about how long this process takes. We have to follow a legal statutory process. My point is, if we got the ball rolling in summer of 2019, I know it's hard to put a figure on it, but we probably would have been 80% through the review stage by now. So I really do think that the Labour group need to, you know, I think they should hang their heads in shame, actually, for not getting the ball rolling with that. What I welcome as well is the fact that we're going to be reviewing the supplementary planning documents, and it really, really frustrates me that as much as I don't like some of these SPDs, they are adopted council policy, and the planning committee and the planning department are not necessarily following adopted council policy when making planning decisions, and that is something that really frustrates me, especially the most recent planning application on the woodlands. With regards to the memorandum of understanding, I suppose it's like the Article 50 process, but for local plans. I like Councillor Smith, absolutely refute the claims which have been put out there by Labour-controlled Coventry City Council. If they want to deliver a local plan based upon flawed ONS statistics, great, that's their choice, and Coventry residents need to will pay the consequences for that. But we're not going to do that. We won't do that, and I do welcome the fact that we are withdrawing from that memorandum. It was a manifesto commitment, and 8 weeks into this Conservative Council, that is what we are delivering. On a final point, I think what we've tried to do is balance some of the concerns from local residents about, and the action groups, about some of the larger scale planning applications being determined during the review. And I get that concern, and that is why we've put in there the clause to ask the Secretary of State to get us a moratorium to put a halt on some, well, not a halt, but to delay the consideration of some of those applications. And I hope that the Secretary of State will grant that. I know that a number of key stakeholders in the Midlands, for example, Andy Street, the Mayor of the West Midlands, have raised their concerns about these flawed ONS statistics. So I think there is a clear case for the Secretary of State to grant that, and I very much hope that the three local members of Parliament in this borough actually do some lobbying behind the scenes on behalf of this borough to get that moratorium for us. So as I say, I'm not against housing, but it's got to be done correctly. And one of the problems we have is we have to meet a 5-year housing land supply. And at the moment, we're only just doing that. I think we're over it by about a month, if that. And I think as this review evolves, one of the problems that we're going to see is the fact that a number of the sites in the borough plan are not deliverable. And they're not going to be deliverable by 2032, which is when I understand the local plan is about to come to an end. So I support the review, and thank you for bringing it forward.
Thank you, Councillor. Next, I've got Councillor Kenner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What a breath of fresh air this is, an administration keeping their election promises. How many is this now? I'm losing count. Anyway, I'm delighted that the administration's finally taken steps to address residents' concerns. I mean, I've been out on the doorstep across the borough for years now, and this has constantly come up on the doorstep. People bitterly unhappy with Labour's unfair borough plan. I think it was Councillor Wilson that mentioned earlier about maybe Coventry Labour bringing in a review. But if you've learned anything from Nuneaton and Bedworth and Bulkinson Labour, they will drag their heels until it's too late to instigate a review. So thank you for mentioning it. And again, another thing in the motion is to work with MPs. Now, over the last decades, we've heard the Labour Party sling blame accusations their way on cuts and all sorts of nonsense. So it's great to see the council finally coming and working together with MPs, with our colleagues in Parliament, to do right by the residents of the borough. So that's really, in essence, why I'll be supporting this motion, because it's the best thing to do for the residents in Nuneaton, Bedworth and Bulkington. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kenny. So next I've got Councillor Condacor.
Chair, I've been involved in fighting the borough plan for a decade. And like Councillor Evans, I know that we need to build some houses in the borough. In fact, I found this in my office. This is well back. 6,500 is how many houses I said we need. About 8 or 9 years ago. Not the 13,000 at the time. And I've consistently said we need that 300 houses a year for our population. If you look at how many people are born, die, living longer, we need, over 20 years, some 6,000, 6,500 houses for our borough's population. And I've been passionate about statistics. I went to the Coventry inquiry and the Nuneaton and Bedworth inquiry and argued at both about the targets we need and the errors in statistics. Consistently, I've been proved right. And now the Office of Statistical Regulation has agreed with me, and I must pay massive tribute to Mill Goering, who's led the campaign to get these statistics overturned. Myself and him and campaigners around the country had meetings with the Office of Statistical Regulation, which resulted in this decision that the stats were poorly founded. And yet it takes a decade to tell them their numbers are wrong. Clearly, Coventry is expanding. It's got a lot of young people, but it's not expanding as ridiculously fast as the City Council want to make out. And what has happened, and it's quite clearly happened, is families are moving out of Coventry to places like Nuneaton, Rugby, Warwick. They're putting pressure on our schools and coming into our new housing. And Coventry is losing the families. The birth rate, the school places, everything about Coventry is saying it's being displacing families with students. And students have children later, and it is really clear, if you add Coventry to Warwickshire as a collective, we never needed the 4,500 houses a year, when you dice it up. And the whole system has been run, and we're doing the right thing. I fully support this motion, but we should have done it 8 years ago. We knew all the numbers were wrong 8 years ago. And there's been far too much Labour blaming Tories, Tories blaming Labour. A lot of the problems have been the national planning policy, and then the south of the county and Coventry pushing the houses up to Nuneaton. And Councillor Wilson said about, well, Coventry says, and the memorandum of understanding pushes it all to Nuneaton, the overflow. And that's because they used commuting. They actually distributed it relative to how many people commuting from Coventry from different directions. People commuting to Coventry from Nuneaton because Coventry has the jobs and we had the housing. To actually build more housing in Nuneaton and Bedworth and Bulkington just makes that commuting flow even bigger and even more unsustainable. At the same time, Coventry is totally fucking up the producing of our railway station extension. We are supposed to get an extra platform in Coventry so we can have a half-hourly train service to Coventry. That has failed. We're not getting the infrastructure we need to support our housing, and our population growth last year from natural change was 0. This has been a massive mess. Apologies for using that term, but I'm annoyed at Coventry for messing up our provision of sustainable transport. We should have rapid trains every half hour.
Actually, Councillor, you need to speak to the motion, and we're not here to talk about trains. This is the borough plan.
The borough plan and redistributing housing is fundamentally about sustainable development, and without a way of getting to and from Coventry, the people will not move to Nuneaton. And if you look at the housing growth at the moment, it is in Stratford-upon-Avon. They have 300 square miles of land in Stratford-upon-Avon District Council. If you build a house there, it is economically viable. I do hope we actually get the ministers and the MPs to put a moratorium on building on countryside in Nuneaton and Bedworth, because it's totally unjustified. I totally support this motion, but I also say we should have done it a decade ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, did you want to come back in?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I appreciate that Councillor Condacor is frustrated with the process, as am I. Having sat here for 11 years, I have also fought the same battles time and time again. But I would ask him to withdraw his, for want of a better phrase, unparliamentary language. I know he apologised, but if he would technically... Okay, he has, for the record, agreed to withdraw his unparliamentary language, and I'm happy to leave it at that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Yes, please can we all remember there is a complete age spectrum audience that will be watching these videos. Thank you. So the next speaker that we have is Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a momentous day for this council. For the first time, we have a council that's showing that it's listened to the people, that's delivering what it promised to do in its election campaign, which was to fight against the borough plan and to do its best to overturn the shameful, back behind closed doors agreement to take overspill from Coventry. Instead of a council that ignores public opinion, we've got a council that listens to public opinion. We're going ahead with a proper consultation, not a sham consultation like before. We started with genuine consultation. We promised that we'd end that deal. We're now about to end that deal. I was involved with the borough plan back from 2010. We had grant chaps came to Ash Green, promised that we could take whatever local demand was as emerging government policy. That was back in the days before 2010 election. We used that information because we knew that we locally could set our own housing target. I then went optimistically to the very first borough plan meetings when I was a councillor previously, expecting that we would come up with a borough plan that would, well, it was basically quite simple: the right number of houses and employment opportunities, the right infrastructure, in the right places, delivered at the right time. It quickly became obvious in those early meetings that what happened was that the controlling group at the time had gone back to the Labour government proposed figures and just imposed them, and then we got an addition created by what was literally a shameful deal done in secret and presented to this council to take Coventry overspill. We were told that we couldn't overturn that. Well, we have tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next I've got Councillor Walmsley.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, let me start by clearing something up. A duty to cooperate is not a duty to capitulate. It is not a duty to fall into line and accept some Labour HQ diktat and bail out Coventry. Nor is it a duty to let Labour Coventry Labour, chuck up student blocks instead of supplying housing for its own population. That is not what a duty to cooperate is, but it is what we were shafted by the previous Labour administration. And we were shafted, Mr Mayor. They didn't turn up to meetings. They missed them. So guess what? Things get decided in your absence. Other authorities do their best to find ways to minimise the burden placed upon them. And with no voice around the table, we were that. We were just that. And I think it's absolutely shameful. The borough plan itself is a absolutely failed document. And I know, Mr Mayor, bound by the chains of office, you can't speak this evening, but you and I have attended many events with residents across Weddington and St Nicholas. You and I attended the borough plan consultation event just 2 nights ago at Higham Lane School. And the reality is, the borough plan came too late for our area. We have the houses, but Labour the developers get away with the no infrastructure. And now across the entire north of Nuneaton, the entirety of Weddington from the border with North Warwickshire through across the whole length of the A5 to the border with Hinckley and Leicestershire is being concreted over. We have one application left to come. One piece of land left. But the problem we're in, Labour's borough plan didn't insist that facilities were built by developers across all those pieces of land that they've currently let be built over. No, they did not. Instead, it is the one piece of land to come that delivers for the thousands. And I suspect by the time you add the numbers up when they're built, probably in the region of 5,000 houses, we are left to one site to deliver GP facilities, one site to deliver local community hub, one site to deliver a senior school for a side of the town which is already crying out for senior school provision, where senior schools have had to have temporary classrooms tacked onto the side to immediately and emergency increase pupil numbers in our side of town. But these schools won't be built quickly enough for the houses that are already occupied upin. No, they won't. They will come far too late. And it is a real shame that this borough plan was too late. It was flawed. And the review, frankly, should have started before they even approved the borough plan. And we all know what Labour's game was. It was to ride it out and hope that the 2010 government would collapse. In 2015, the Labour government would ride in, and all they would do is just go back to the top-down way that they'd worked for 13-odd years in power. And that didn't happen. And by that point, because we hadn't, as an authority, begun to work on what was government policy, we were 5 years behind neighbouring authorities. We were starting off from a back foot and a disadvantage before we even sat down in a room. There has been a dereliction of duty, a huge dereliction of duty, by this authority, and it's shameful, sir. It is shameful, Mr. Mayor. And it has come at the detriment of residents, across the board, but particularly those of Weddington and St Nicholas, who I think everybody can agree have been the hardest done by. So what we have is a situation where there were, I think, around 10 applications on pieces of land, certainly 6 to 10, something in that figure from memory, of which none of them have really delivered any facilities. The promise of money through 106 agreements, which, by the way, developers are now trying to renegotiate, and I'm very glad the Planning Committee have put their foot down on one of those, and I hope that we would certainly be able to advocate the same in future, which could be subject to change. The promise of potential money in the future, which we cannot guarantee. And yet we don't have the service. So now we are in a situation where all of the eggs across the whole of Weddington and St Nicholas are in one basket. That is shameful. That is absolutely a dereliction of duty, and it will be a stain on this authority for decades to come. Mr. Mayor, as I say, a duty to cooperate, not a duty to capitulate. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councillor. Next I've got Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have looked at this motion in great detail. I'm not in favour of development in the Greenbelt without very good reasons. And I am aware of development in the Greenbelt with over 600 properties on my doorstep due to be built. The Memorandum of Understanding is embedded into the local plan. The inspector agreed the council had met its duty to cooperate. I've asked an officer some questions, and at this time I'm unsure how this motion would leave us legally, if it would undermine any ongoing work with other authorities and any resource and financial implications going forward. Section 3 of the proposal distracts from our responsibilities of the Memorandum of Understanding and would therefore shed a bad light on this authority to the Government Inspector. So at this time, I cannot support the motion as it does not satisfy my concerns. So I will be abstaining, which is not something I would normally do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Next I've got Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, this is something that was planned, proposed and agreed to previously when the borough plan was agreed, that there would be an urgent review of the borough plan. It hasn't happened. It didn't happen. All the time Labour were in control. We are doing what they failed to do and bringing this now fully, openly, and to ensure that the public can hear what's going on, what's being said, where there are opportunities for delivery of plans and where we need to reconsider those plans wherever possible. As has been identified, we've already got plans across the piece, and in North East, Nuneaton, St Nicholas, Weddington, there is far too much development. In addition to that, as identified, there's no services. The services weren't in there. In our plan, I'm hoping that when we do the plan, when we bring it forward, those services will be incorporated, included and addressed as we ensure that they provide for the developments that we have to take. I hear what's being said about Coventry. Very disappointingly, we had to take those houses at the time. Shouldn't have happened. We all agree that now. And I think, to be honest with you, if we could change that immediately, then we would. But we have to go through a process. We're going through that process now. This is part of that process, and I'm hoping that the public will get on board with the process and take that on. Also, in the current borough plan, there's been a failure in relation to protecting our public open spaces. We need to ensure that those open spaces are protected in our new borough plan as we develop this. There has to be that openness, transparency, opportunity for those spaces to be kept and maintained, properly maintained. And also, as finally has been pointed out, the infrastructure. It's a serious consideration in relation to any borough plan, that the infrastructure is part of the borough plan, and we work with our partners, neighbours, upper tier authorities to ensure that they deliver the services that is needed in relation to developing any borough plan. I will be supporting this motion. It needs to come forward now, as is identified. It's been a long while coming. It's took a change in the administration to get us here, and we are doing it now. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Right. I don't have any further speakers, so oh, sorry.
You're not getting away without me having a word on this.
Councillor Cekovic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I would not have forgiven you if you'd have overlooked me on this particular item. So, yeah, I've been engaged with fighting the borough plan for about the last 4 years or so. And what struck me in my time that I've been sort of involved in the borough plan is just the lack of, how to put this without sort of being rude or nasty, it's the lack of engagement we've had from the Labour group who were in charge at the time. You know, at every stage of the game, you weren't interested. You didn't turn up to stage 1 hearings. You didn't turn up to stage 2 hearings. Not a single one of you here. Yet I saw people from the Conservative benches, from the Greens, turning up and actually speaking out for residents. But you deemed that beneath you at every single turn. Okay, you sat down with Coventry behind closed doors and you bashed out an agreement. But you weren't there from the start, no, because that would have been too easy. You waited until they sort of almost bullied you in. And I think Coventry have acted dishonourably throughout this borough plan around the Memorandum of Understanding and how numbers have been sort of issued out. Your biggest failing, however, is allowing them to bully you as a Labour leadership into accepting those numbers and not challenging it, not making this your plan. And the Inspector was very clear on this. He said it on a number of occasions, and you'd know this if you actually bothered to turn up to any of the hearings, but he said, this is your plan. And I quote him on that. And he also said, you're playing the right notes, just not necessarily in the right order. And that was the closing remarks of the stage 2 hearings. Okay? And you didn't listen. You gave him what you thought he wanted to hear rather than listening to what the residents wanted. And I'm delighted tonight that we've actually got this in front of us because it's been a long time in coming and it should have been something your party proposed 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and you didn't. So I will be certainly backing this. I think the residents will be happy with it. And I'm really glad that we've got the moratorium in there, in particular, for the simple fact that while we're dilly-dallying and we're having to go through the correct procedures, it's going to take us till February 23 to get this sort of done, we're going to have developers coming forward. And that doesn't sit easy with me or the residents of this borough. And we need to make sure that we're doing everything that we can. So please take note, this is how it's done. Okay, this is how you stand up and you actually give voice to your residents. And again, see, like councillors like Councillor Shepherd looking disinterested at the moment. That's fine. That sums up your attitude throughout this entire plan. So we need to ensure that we get this in front of the Secretary of State. Okay, I know it's not within our gift to grant, but we at least need to go and ask these questions, because if we don't ask, we don't get. So I will certainly be supporting this. I think it's bold, it's innovative, it's what the residents have been after for a number of years. And I'm glad that we're listening to the residents as a group. As a Conservative group, we are standing up for the people who have put us here. We're not going to ignore them. You know, we're not saying no houses, we're saying the right houses in the right places, okay? And if it means we upset Coventry, well, so be it. You know, we'll go through that process. You know, we'll never know what will happen unless we stand up and have our voices heard and have, you know, our day in court. So I'm delighted with that, and I will be certainly supporting this motion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sekovic. Right, so I really didn't have any other speakers. So, Councillor Watkins, I'd like to bring you in then.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I've heard a lot tonight about Labour did this, Labour didn't do that, and all the rest of it. But it says here on the first paragraph, this requirement came of the housing need assessment based upon population projections made of the Office of National Statistics. Well, that's not the Labour group, is it? That's not the Labour Party, that's not the Labour group. So the housing figures came from the National Statistics. I'm also going to be interested on how you find your 5-year housing supply, which Councillor Evans has already said that we've only just there. So I don't know how we're going to find that. I agree that we're not building the right houses, and we'll keep going on the schlart from 2013. It's not up to date, and I'm sure Councillor Golby is beginning to learn a lot about this now, where we're just not building the right houses. We need lots of 1- and 2-bedroom properties within this borough. Before I was the councillor, actually, the MP for Nuneaton was then the leader of this council, and he was asked to start this borough plan to go forward then, but he didn't. So it would be interesting to get all 3 MPs for Volkington, Nuneaton and Bedworth to have a look at this. That's good. The Borough Plan Working Party, I was briefly on that, and I can remember Councillor O'Brien turning up. I can't remember any others, but then again I could be wrong, could have been others turned up to that. The infrastructure. Warwickshire County Council get every opportunity to comment at every application and don't seem to comment. I'm not saying that our infrastructure is any good, because it ain't. It's absolutely diabolical. But Warwickshire County Council should do a lot more when the planning applications are there. So I hope the Warwickshire County Councillors do something about that. Mr. Mayor, that's as much as I'm going to say on this tonight. I do hope this don't end up costing this council a lot of money, and look forward to seeing the review when it's finally done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
An explanation, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yes, Councillor Clark, if it's about something you've said.
It's in relation to my comments around working with the Warwickshire County Council. My comments were that as part of the development of the borough plan, it's necessary to work with upper tier authorities and other authorities, and that includes Warwickshire County Council, and making sure that they are consulted within the plan itself, not after the event and in relation to individual applications.
Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, so Councillor Golby, you seconded. Would you, and reserved your right to speak, would you like to...
Thanks, Chair. So I'm going to respond directly to the Cabinet member in Coventry who said he's disappointed that we're doing this. Well, you can be as disappointed as you like, because we are disappointed that we have had to put up with this third-rate borough plan off the back of the nonsense that we've had to deal with in overspill numbers. We've had to go and deal with this for years. And as you've already mentioned, there's great swathes of our green and open spaces that are now no longer there because we've had to tolerate building on them. We shouldn't have done that. This duty to cooperate is not a duty to roll over. Unfortunately, trying to tell that to the previous administration, it was said many, many times, and it fell on deaf ears pretty much every time. I'd also like to highlight the fact, again, while I'm speaking directly to Coventry, about the recent revelations that the student accommodation that they've been throwing up instead of housing for their residents, they've not actually been charging their developers any sort of developer contributions. So they've missed out on millions and millions of pounds that they could have charged their developers in contributions for student accommodation. However, they decided that it might put developers off. So when you get Labour MPs standing up in Parliament decrying the Tories and their developers, well, I think the particular Labour MP for Coventry South needs to look a bit closer to home than Tory developers. I'd also like to say that actually, ironically, the Coventry MPs agree with the fact that their Coventry housing numbers are wrong. So they've gone on record with that. And it's not very often that I agree with the member for Coventry South, but on this occasion, I do. Also, the MP of the West Midlands, Andy Street, has been saying it for a long, long time. A long time. He's also done a brownfield first approach in the wider West Midlands, which has been welcomed by other authorities and not so much taken on board by Coventry. To go back to something that Councillor Kandaka said about it takes a decade to tell Coventry the numbers are wrong. No, it doesn't. It takes them a decade to listen, to actually listen to the fact that their numbers are wrong. I did a lot in Coventry during the 2019 general election, and every doorstep that I was on, it was a bone of contention. So it's not as if they need to get their own house in order, is what I'm saying. We are doing that here. We deserve it. Our residents deserve it, and we are here to do it. And also, again, Councillor Kandaka said that it should have been done 8 years ago. Well, yeah, it should have been done 8 years ago. We've been in 8 weeks, roughly. We're doing it. So, again, should have voted Tory ages ago. We'd have been down the line now. Also on infrastructure, I've had conversations with members at the County Council where I want an infrastructure first approach. I've been very clear and very straight about any development in my area. I would like an infrastructure first approach. I expect that to be a conversation that I have a very serious conversation, because there is public funds involved and money, and infrastructure always costs money, but that's what I want. I think that is the best way to go. We've done it in other areas for housing developments, and I don't see why we can't do it here. The problem we've got in Weddington and St Nick's is it's too late. It's too late for that, and everything's a bit piecemeal, so nothing really joins up. So there are issues on that front, but I am quite steadfast in my views that we should be putting infrastructure. I've said for a long time, infrastructure is the bones, and you can't put flesh on the bones if you've got no bones. So that's what we need. I would just like to also point out that the legal office have had this motion, so it has been confirmed as being above board and legal. If it turns out that it's not, there will be some serious questions asked. I'm sure that Councillor Wilson would agree with me on that one. And so I don't think there's any issue with the legality of the motion that's in front of us tonight. My message overall, really, is that we are listening to people. We have listened to people, and we will continue listening to people. And where we can, we will try and do what we can to rectify the mistakes and the errors that have gone before us. My message to Coventry, again, I suppose, is that they aren't safe. We've demonstrated that here in Nuneaton. And if you don't listen to people, Nuneaton, Bedworth and Bulkington are a very good example of what happens when that doesn't occur. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I would now turn to Councillor Wilson just to respond before the vote.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think there have been some quite telling comments about Labour's position or lack thereof tonight on the borough plan. I think one key theme that has come out of all of the debate tonight can be summed up in one word, and that's leadership. We have shown far more leadership in 8 weeks on the borough plan than Labour did in the 10 years that they had in control from 2010 to 2021. And it's an absolute crying shame that it takes a change in administration to actually stand up for the residents of Nuneaton and Bedworth. That should be happening regardless of political colour. And I think that is a damning indictment of the Labour administration. And when we had the borough plan process and we looked at all of this, I remember turning up to the borough plan consultation events. Not one Labour councillor turned up. They hid behind officers. And what have we done during this borough plan review under the new Conservative administration? Councillor Smith has been to, I believe, every single one of the consultation events so far, fronting out the messages from the public and answering questions as a politician with responsibility ought to. And I have directed as leader of the council that there should be a cabinet member at least at every single consultation event. And indeed, I have been to one myself, and I have a couple more planned in the diary. Assuming that I don't get called off on other leadership business, I intend to attend as many as I possibly can. Now, the 2015 Memoranda of Understanding is hard to find, Mr Mayor. It's buried, not on our website, it's on Rugby's, because they hosted or facilitated most of these events. It's only on our website when it comes to the examination of the borough plan. And in case members haven't seen it, that's what it looks like. And it was drafted in 2015. We are working on figures from 2015 on this, and there are some authorities in Warwickshire which have taken 0 houses from Coventry's overspill. And the last time I checked, those authorities were still within the ceremonial county of Warwickshire. So by the time we get to today, that agreement is 6 years old and is very out of date. And by the time we get to the review in 2023, it will be ancient in comparison to where we are now. It is out of date, and we should throw it out now because the review needs to be worked on with current data. It is using data that has been proved to be demonstrably flawed by a national office of responsibility. And Coventry are burying their heads in the sand in not actually listening to that ruling and ploughing on regardless. So I would actually say Coventry are failing in their duty to cooperate with us in having a review, and they should be acting on that report which came out from the statistics regulator. Now, I spent some time last night in preparation for this meeting reading the dryly named Shadow Economic Prosperity Board minutes on the aforementioned Rugby Borough Council website, and Councillor Harvey and then Councillor Jackson as sub and then leader barely spoke. All the action was from the other leaders on that board. And indeed, there is one quote that says, Councillor Harvey left the room when certain items were being discussed. So clearly, others were in the driving seat, and Nuneaton was left and Bedworth was left to pick up the pieces. And indeed, in those minutes, Coventry and the other districts effectively ganged up on us and said, we're going to examine your sites for deliverability unless you agree to take in those 4,000 houses, and we will put in a collective objection to your borough plan. And we caved in. Why didn't we or Labour at the time instruct officers to challenge Coventry's figures, to challenge Coventry's site, to challenge Coventry's green belt, because while Coventry protected their green belt, we sacrificed ours, and that is fundamentally unfair, Mr. Mayor. Now, the Leader of the Opposition refers to what did Marcus Jones do when he was in control in 2008? Well, actually, he got the ball rolling because we had the issues and options consultation, which went out under Marcus, and the results came back that most residents would prefer small urban extensions to development, not massive, wide-scale new villages or even mini towns, for want of a better phrase. So there is hope for the future. The current memoranda of understanding applies to the borough plan now, but we are adamant that in the borough plan review it will not, and that we need to have a fairly negotiated understanding between us that meets the criteria of fairness. Because under the standard method, Mr. Mayor, we only need 6,000 houses. It is the Coventry overspill which is the key. So again, Mr. Mayor, I am happy to support the motion. And I call for a recorded vote because residents deserve to know how everyone votes on this item. It's a massive implication.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. And we have had the requisite number stand. So, Brent, will you kindly call the vote, individual councillors and record the votes? Thank you. Four.
Four.
Four. So that's carried 11 votes for, 2 abstentions. Thank you very much. Right, we now move to item 16, which is questions from members. Pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 10, a copy of which is attached on page 102. Remember, these are not subject to debate. I have now got a list of the questions. As Councillor Rudkin has had to leave, do you want to read it, Councillor Watkins, or shall I, or whatever you want? Please, if you would. Thank you, Councillor.
To the portfolio holder for housing and communities. Following the decision to cease the buying of properties for NABSO to let the council for the council, does the portfolio holder for housing and communities intend to continue with a programme of new builds within the HRA that commenced under the former Labour group?
Thank you, Councillor. So, Councillor Golby, can I call on you to respond to that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To be clear, because it doesn't sound clear in the question, NABSEL does not house council tenants. The decision to pause the purchase of properties for NABSEL, the decision was to pause it, not to cease it. So we will actually be reviewing the restarting of the purchasing of properties for NABSEL in the next financial year. The strategy for the housing revenue account remains the same: to invest in its existing stock and to provide additional homes where financially able to do so, to provide much needed and affordable accommodation within our borough. A programme that we are able to undertake following the move to self-financing in April of 2012 and the removal of the borrowing cap on the HRA in October 2018. Had the changes allowing us to self-finance had not happened in 2012, the HRA borrowing cap being lifted in 2018, we would not have been able to start the building programme at all. These changes to legislation were done under successive Conservative governments. In 2018, the then Councillor Jackson, as part of this council's Labour leadership of the time, proposed as part of the annual budget setting a plan to use the lifting of the HRA borrowing cap in order to build 257 council houses over a long-term plan. I believe it was 30 years, if I remember rightly. The Conservative group, who were in opposition at the time, proposed an amendment to that housing revenue account budget as part of our own shadow budget. That Conservative resolution, over the same period of time as the Labour leadership's proposals, would have delivered 333 homes. We worked with officers at the time. We had a fully costed scheme, and that scheme would have delivered 76 more homes than the Labour administration's proposals did. That's 76 more families with a place to call home. This was actually rejected by the Labour councillors, who voted down our amendment and voted instead for their own proposals to build the lesser amount. Some of those councillors are still councillors today. No one should be in any doubt about the commitment of this Conservative group to provide the best for our residents, to make a difference, and to, most of all, get things done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Question 2 is actually from Councillor Watkins this time, so if I can ask you to read out your question, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. To the portfolio holder of Housing and Communities. Although we have a number of hostels within the borough to help people who unfortunately find themselves needing temporary accommodation, we are still paying for in excess of 30 people per week to stop in B&Bs. Can the portfolio holder tell me roughly, and I know this changes each week, how much this is costing the borough, and does the portfolio holder find it acceptable that the government allow this situation to continue?
Thank you, Councillor. Can I call upon the portfolio holder to answer that?
Me again. I'll take that question in two parts. First of all, how much is it costing the borough? So these are figures that I've had from officers, and it's basically on average we've got 30 people housed in external accommodation, and we do receive funding to cover part of that, but the net cost to the council is around £10,000 per week. It should be noted also that for the 2020-2021 time period there have been considerably more placements and rooms required external to the council as a direct impact of the pandemic. However, we have continued to be successful in securing government funding of around £738,000. This is to help things like operation of the rough sleeper hostel, to deliver enhanced housing solutions services which prioritise preventing homelessness wherever possible, planning the conversion of our own hostels to create self-contained accommodations, removing shared bathrooms and kitchens, making them safer and more appropriate for homeless households. These sorts of things will eventually reduce the need for hotel use, hopefully, as will the easing of the COVID pandemic restrictions. We've also secured funding from Warwickshire County Council to deliver support to homeless households, including a bespoke service targeted at local private sector landlords in an attempt to prevent evictions following the relaxation of the evictions ban and the reopening of the courts and the reinstating of repossession cases. There has also been COVID outbreak management fund money from the government, totalling approximately £400,000 received by Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council via Warwickshire County Council to assist with the Bringing Everyone In campaign. And that was to make sure we didn't have people who were homeless during the pandemic. Now, the question, do I find it acceptable that the government allows this situation to continue? Let me be clear on this. The government is not allowing homelessness to continue. There are many reasons why people become homeless. Some are intensely personal ones, like sexual or domestic abuse within the home. Homelessness is not a one-size-fits-all problem that can be eradicated with some sort of magic bullet. It's just not going to work like that. Anybody who is involved in dealing with the issue of homelessness will tell you it has occurred and will continue to occur in some way under successive governments of all political persuasions. Ultimately, and with legislation like the Homelessness Reduction Act, and the clue's in the name for that one, this government, their drive is to actually prevent homelessness before it occurs. I'd actually be worried, it would concern me greatly if government said that they would pay all the costs for in full every time an instance of homelessness happened. And it would concern me because I actually believe it would lead to more homelessness. And I say that because at the moment we put a lot of work into preventing homelessness. And if some councils knew the government were going to pick up the bill for people becoming homeless, they would simply stop trying to prevent homelessness. And it would bother me greatly because I think there would be complacency within some councils. I don't think they would do everything they could to prevent families becoming homeless. And the net result of that would be more people becoming homeless. So that is my personal view. And I hope it's acceptable.
Thank you, Councillor. So now we come to
the new constitution.
Right, supplementary questions, I believe, Councillor, are supposed to come from the person that asked the original question. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to say no on that one. We're coming to question 3. It's the final question. It's from Councillor Condacor. If you'd like to read out your question.
Thank you very much, Chair. We have a significant number of residents having difficulties using the doors in their council flats, including some that now can only exit by their patio doors after the doors have been fitted with, been replaced with heavier fire doors. Thankfully, the council in the past has installed electronic assisted opening devices for some of the borough's disabled residents. This is now being done by the council's Heart project, but it's failing to deliver. Very hard to contact, and in one case in my ward, a resident has been waiting many months unable to go out. Can the Cabinet member investigate what's going wrong with the Heart programme and tell my resident when they will have the door opener fitted? I've provided the details, but obviously that's just between us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Again, if I can call on the portfolio holder to respond.
It's like the Claire show, this, isn't it? I've spoken to people about this, and we are only aware of one resident currently experiencing difficulties with the operation of the instalment of the fire doors, and the fire doors are necessary. They are necessary for safety. And also, the Heart team is not delivering on the project of the electric door assistance. So the role of Heart is to assess the needs of those who are experiencing difficulties due to health and other medical conditions. Heart assessed the tenant in question within a short time frame, 4 days actually, and referred the project on to the capital projects team to install the assisted door opener. The capital projects team engaged an appropriate contractor to carry out the site survey and then undertake the installation of the mechanism. Unfortunately, there has been a delay experienced in terms of supply and workforce availability and with the contractor. And we all know this is an issue that we're seeing increasingly because of COVID and bubbles and everything else. We've been assured that the works will be carried out within the next 2 weeks and their progress will be monitored. In the meantime, the affected resident has been contacted and additional assistance has been offered by the council to help the resident in any way possible while we are waiting the completion of the works. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Golby. That's the end of the questions that we have and the end of item 16. The next item is the exclusion of public and press. I would like to explain before we move on to that, that this is that we are a very open council and we like to put everything on the record for residents to see either on live stream or on the video. In this particular instance, that the item that follows is about staffing and staff management structures. We'll be talking about potentially employees and to protect employees and confidentiality as residents would rightly expect. We're doing that in a closed session. So, exclusion of public and press, recommended under section 100 A brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972 that the public and press be excluded from the meeting during consideration of the following item, it being likely that there would be disclosure of exempt information of the description specified in paragraphs 1 to 4 of Part 1 of the Schedule 12A of the Act. Right, that's got the legalese out of it. So, that's been moved by the Chair. Is there a seconder?
I will second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Then we will move to the vote. All those in favour? Any against?
Can you record my vote as well, please?
We will do, Councillor. Yeah, Wahida can make a note. Thank you. Yeah. Right, in that case, it just remains for us to get confirmation that the recording and live streaming has all been stopped. It's just been stopped. Great. Okay, in that case, let's move on to item 18, restructuring of the management team.